Dear friends, last week I picked from the shelves in my study two books, Strategies of Containment and Year of Decisions. The first, by John Lewis Gaddis, must have been on my Politics 101 reading list 35 years ago. And though it showed the dust, its analysis of George Kennan's approach to the Cold War and Russia's expanding sphere of influence certainly has renewed relevance. The second, an autographed memoir by Harry Truman, was given by the president to my father in 1956. Truman has always been something of a hero in my home because of our Kansas City roots and because of our mutual family friend, Eddie Jacobson, who had lobbied Truman's support for the creation of a Jewish state. Of course, it was during Truman's presidency that Kennan's notion of containing the Soviet threat emerged, and out of it the Truman Doctrine, that the United States would shift its foreign policy from one of non-engagement in regional conflicts not directly affecting the United States to one of supporting democracies imperiled by authoritarianism through economic, diplomatic, and military support. Though Truman ultimately applied Kennan's strategy in ways Kennan himself had not intended. The issue at hand in 1947 was the Greek Civil War and the specter of both Greece and Turkey falling under Soviet control. And so Truman asked Congress to provide aid, equipment, and military personnel to the region. Truman recognized the security benefits of maintaining stability along the Mediterranean, but he also insisted that America support free peoples in their fight against totalitarian regimes. Along with a political exigency, Truman articulated a moral responsibility. In a recent article in Foreign Policy magazine, James Traub asked whether Ukraine represents President Biden's Truman moment. Truman's declaration that, quote, "It must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation, if still meaningful, certainly implies America shoulders some responsibility to assist Ukraine, particularly since Ukraine stands as the buffer between Russia and Europe and seems but a proxy for Putin's real enemy, the US-led West. Unfortunately, the implementation of sanctions, the dispatch of arms, and the commitment to resettle refugees seem to be the limits of American and European options. And they haven't stopped Putin from indiscriminately bombing civilian targets, the human toll rising daily. Should the West intervene directly in Ukraine, then the battlefield becomes much larger and the potential weaponry much deadlier. So though Ukrainians stand on the front lines of this larger conflict between totalitarianism and democracy, they are left alone to fight for their survival. And perhaps it is because they know they are alone in fighting for their survival, their land, their families, and their people, that they have demonstrated a measure of bravery, determination, and patriotism no one anticipated and all the world admires. As Jews, we know a historical parallel. Immediately following Israel's declaration of its UN-recognized independence on May 14, 1948, 5 Arab nations invaded what had been till then Palestine under the British Mandate. Israel was largely alone, The United States provided no arms once the war began. The fledgling state was forced to smuggle them in primarily from Czechoslovakia. Fighting for its survival, Israel somehow won. Given that history, Israel's ambivalent response to Russia's assault on Ukraine is, at first consideration, bewildering. Yes, Israel's foreign minister Yair Lapid quickly denounced the invasion. But while Prime Minister Naftali Bennett promised humanitarian support to Ukraine and is preparing the country to welcome a wave of Jewish refugees for Aliyah, he has refused to pick sides in the conflict. Israel reportedly rejected Ukrainian requests for intelligence support and military equipment, and only this week agreed finally to back a United Nations resolution condemning Russia's aggression. Certainly, Israel's leaders are mindful of Russia's influence in Syria, Israel's northern enemy, and they require Russia's cooperation to thwart Syria's alliance with Iran. Still, as Natan Sharansky, born in Ukraine and imprisoned in the Soviet Gulag, noted, Putin is challenging all the principles of the free world, all those values that the Jewish state is built on, and we cannot simply be silent. Last week, one of our members wrote me asking whether there was something more we might do for Ukraine than pray. And there is. A few days ago, Temple Emanu-El established a collection drive of first aid and personal hygiene kits, which will be sent to Ukraine by the Afia Foundation. As I said last Shabbat, there are many agencies on the ground in the region preparing to assist those who are wounded, fleeing their homes, whose lives have been turned upside down. And thanks to our congregation's generosity, Temple Emanu-El has directed grants through UJA Federation, the World Union for Progressive Judaism, and IsraAid to support Ukraine's brave people, among them 200,000 Jews. And every year, we support HIAS's efforts to address refugee crises around the world, including the one unfolding in Ukraine, where the number of internally displaced could grow into the millions, and the crisis in its western borderlands of Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova, where more than 1 million Ukrainians have already fled. How deeply disturbing to have learned in recent days of racial bias against blacks trying to flee, being directed to separate lines or thrown off trains. For many of us, this tragedy strikes quite personally. Either our families came to America from Ukraine, or we ourselves did. Another Temple member wrote, sharing, "The war has come to our home. My partner's parents are trapped in Kyiv, and her sister's family just completed a 45-hour escape from Kyiv to Warsaw on a packed train without food or sleep or water." And wherever our genealogical roots lie, our spiritual roots grew in Ukraine. Ukraine was birthplace of the Hasidic movement and the rabbis whose stories we tell, like Nachman of Bratslav, Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, Dov Ber of Mezrich. It was also the homeland of early Zionist pioneers like Zev Jabotinsky and later leaders like Golda Meir. And across the centuries, back to the Khmelnytsky massacres, no lands absorbed more Jewish blood than the bloodlands of Eastern Europe. Ukraine's past struggles with anti-Semitism are a fact. The slaughter at Babin Yar, like the ravine itself, cuts as a scar on the land and on our memory. Last fall, President Zelensky, himself a Jew whose family was shot by the Nazis in the Holocaust of bullets, inaugurated a memorial at Babin Yar, a long overdue public acknowledgement of the scope of the Jewish tragedy that occurred there, which the Soviets tried to hide, along with the deaths of millions of other Ukrainians under Stalin. A Russian airstrike hit near Babin Yar earlier this week. Sharansky now chairs the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, and of Putin, who has perversely claimed to be denazifying Ukraine, Sharansky offered this: his efforts to distort and manipulate the Holocaust to justify an illegal invasion of a sovereign democratic country is utterly abhorrent. It is symbolic that he starts attacking Kyiv by bombing the site of the biggest of Nazi massacres. We must not allow the truth to once again become the victim of war. The truth is, Russians too are victims of Putin, economically, psychologically. Many have fled from Ukraine or in Ukraine. Thousands have risked arrest to protest his aggression. Their freedoms are being taken from them. In 1991, Ukraine was finally free from Soviet totalitarianism. In the years since, its trajectory toward functioning democracy and independence from Russian influence has been uneven, but it achieved them. The largest country in Europe with a population of 44 million, Ukraine is among the world leaders in the production of potatoes and wheat, iron and steel. One of our tradition's many teachings on peace prohibits the altars of the Israelites' wilderness sanctuary, about which we read this morning, from being fashioned with the use of iron, because iron is an implement of war. Several weeks ago in the Torah, we read of the Israelites' loss of faith and their building of the golden calf. God's miraculous act of deliverance at the Red Sea, and God's manifest presence amidst the thunder and lightning of the revelation of the Ten Commandments already forgotten, the Israelites had fashioned an idol of gold in which they placed their faith. But in this week's portion, the people offer up their gold once again, this time not for an image of God, but instead for a house for God, the tabernacle. And so we can pray that if a golden idol can be redeemed and made to adorn God's sanctuary, then perhaps there is yet hope for iron and steel. After all, we are taught, they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. And all shall sit under vine and fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. May that day come soon. Amen.